Here is a response to an AskProfWolff question sent in from our Patreon community, and in particular from one of its members, Mitchell Gallman. He picks up correctly that we spend a good bit of time here advocating for, discussing, exploring worker co-ops as a fundamental democratic alternative to the top-down hierarchical capitalist corporation in which a tiny number of people, an individual capitalist, a family, or a board of directors in the modern corporations that do most of the business in capitalism, the tiny number of people at the top who make all the decisions and are unaccountable in doing that to the vast majority of employees. The employees, as you know, have to live with the consequences of those decisions, including losing their jobs and incomes, but have no control over the decision makers, which is the opposite of a democratic system. Mitchell Gallman asks the question, how would an economy based on worker co-ops handle two particular problems? The first one is the desire of many workers, expressed all the time, that they don't want to go to a lot of meetings. They don't want to spend a lot of their time and energy planning and organizing and doing all the things that in a genuine worker co-op is what workers do, because they're no longer just employees. They are likewise, and at the same time, collectively, their own employer. And that implies meetings to make all of those decisions that are now taken away from the majority of people and given to the minority at the top. Well, I think it's a perfectly good question, and it raises the question broadly of how you self-manage worker co-ops. And there I think the democratic principle is what should apply. It should be decided in a co-op-based economy and society how to handle these questions. And here are some of the options to choose among. Number one, you could call it maybe a strict option, would require that everybody participate. That the whole idea of a worker co-op economy is to give you the power, but with it also the responsibility of managing the economy, not giving that enormous power over to a tiny minority, especially one that has so often abused it in terms of the instability of capitalism, the inequality it breeds, and so on. So you could have a rule, you don't have to, but you could have a rule that everybody has to participate. Of course, participate is a general term. What that means can range from anything from a meeting every day to a meeting once every 5 months or something like that. And that could be organized, chosen, in all manner of ways. That's the first option. But here's a second option. You could make it voluntary. Becomes a situation where if you choose voluntarily not to participate, okay, then you live with the results of the decisions reached by those who do choose to participate. You have the right at any time to rejoin the participating group, but you are also free, if you wish, not to. Then there are in-between options. You don't have to for periods of time if you have a good reason. You have family issues. You're not feeling well. You're working on a special project. Who knows? But then you have to kind of come back. That would be another arrangement. Or you have, without an explanation, X times every 10 years that you don't participate, and then X times every 10 years that you are then going to have to. All these varying arrangements can be and will be worked out. There is no reason to assume that one of these many options, especially not the strict one, is somehow a necessary part of what a worker co-op based economy looks like. That's making it very rigid in a way that was never intended by those of us who advocate for this system. The second question Mitchell Gallman raises is, What about people who are not workers? In other words, what happens to the people who, for a variety of reasons, don't work in an enterprise, a factory, an office, or a store, but then are, in a sense, excluded because if all the decisions are made by the workers collectively in a co-op at the workplace, what happens to people who don't go on a regular basis to a workplace? Good question, and here's the way most of us kind of tilt towards an answer. We would like enterprises to be governed not only by the workers who work there. In other words, we're focused on democratizing the workplace, and step one is stopping a small, unaccountable minority, the capitalist way, from running enterprises and giving that over to the democracy of all those who work there. But that's only step one. Step two is to make enterprises also accountable and responsible to the communities in which they exist and the customers whom they serve. And there has to be a way to make the decision-making democratic first in terms of the workers who work there and who in the most immediate and total sense depend on that enterprise, but also the community where the enterprise is located, which is affected by its decisions, and the customers who are likewise affected by its decisions. So we tend to move in the direction of a kind of co-determination, if you like, co-decision making, in which a particularly important place, because of their important dependence on these decisions, is given to the workers. But there has to be representation, voting authority, veto power, if you like, on the part of the communities and the customers, because they too are stakeholders in what a good democratic economic system would work like. So it's a process of moving democratically away from the autocracy of capitalism inside enterprises, opening it up first to the workers, and then step two to the communities where they're located and the customers whom they serve. I hope this is an interesting response to another really good question from our Patreon community.